Okay. So what we're talking about last class with Merleau-Ponty is this idea of phenomenology, giving an account of the world, in some sense, a pure empiricism, giving a pure account of the world from your own subjective vantage point. So making this distinction between subject and object. And Maurice Merleau-Ponty says, let's go even further, that basically all you have is just sensation. And sensation presents itself under these two aspects, the aspect of what you denote as being the objective and the aspect which you denote as being the me subjective aspect. So Heidegger, why is this freezing a little bit? Hold on. It's not cooperating with me, the slides. So Heidegger is going to take that kind of one step further. He's still with that, okay? That basically there's this intertwine between what you regard as the subjective you and the world, okay? You are not something distinct from the world for Heidegger. You are involved in the world. So what you are, let me try to put it this way. What you intend to do, in some sense, shapes the environment. What you are is going to bring out certain things in the environment. Now you say, well, the environment is there independent of you. That's kind of theoretical. There's no point. That's kind of, we're creating a sort of, averaged out abstraction of what the world is independent of us. Heidegger always is basically going to say the world presents itself to you based on what you're looking for. Okay, so the perspective that you go in, or the mindset that you go in with it, or the mood that you go in with it, or the tools that you go into the world with, different things are going to stand out. Okay. So this is kind of a quote that I like. How do you want to divide up the world? The world does not already come sort of carved out and divided up. You're the one that divides up the world into what things are and what things stand out and what things are important to you and what things are not important to you. So you can divide up into things into, okay, what can be seen, what cannot be seen. You can divide up the world into things that I can eat and things that can eat me. You can divide up into the world into things, if let's say our eyes are our primary sense. So we normally talk about things in kind of visual terms. If you made a mouth your primary sense, then this quote would be true, okay? The world would consist of two things that you can eat and things that you can't eat. And that would be the singular most important dividing factor, If you're, let's say, a Christian or something like that, the world is divided up into, sinners and saints. If you're, a scientist, then the world is divided up into things that you can observe, things that you can't observe. If you're a musician, the world is understood in terms of notes and sounds and pitch and stuff like that. So let's get into this. As I said, there are three things that I want to talk about. This conception of being, what is existence? And Heidegger says, after 2,000 years of Western philosophy, we're not any closer to really answering the question, what is existence? Okay, and in some sense, he says we've gone down some roads that now we've gotten lost in our own language. We need to sort of backtrack out of those roads to get back to a kind of a more direct and obvious sense of what is even meant by the word being. What does it mean for something to be? And then he's going to ask that question with regards to us. What kind of beings are we? What is, let's say, what the question is, what is human essence? That's one way of looking at what Heidegger, one of the main questions that Heidegger is asking. What is human essence? And then I want to talk about this idea of being authentic and inauthentic, and then this idea of the role and the potential problems with technology with regards to authenticity. So those three things. But let's just look at the question of human essence, because we already talked about it with Sartre. And what Sartre's philosophy is, in some sense, a simplified export of Heidegger's philosophy. Sartre says, your essence is not defined. You define your essence. But Heidegger is going to go even further. Not only do you find your own essence, But Sartre, remember, Sartre talks about the essence of a coupe papier. He talks about the essence of a scissors, or the essence of a hammer. And he says, the essence of a human being is not determined, but the essence of a hammer is determined. Heidegger is going to go even further. Okay. And some of you, I've had some of you, maybe if you're smart, you kind of realize that, well, the essence of the objects that are also in the world are not inherent to the world. The essence of things that I call objects or tools that I use are not independent of me, but are also dependent on me. Okay, but even further, it's a complex philosophy. Even further, the tool. There's two things that you have to understand. Objects is they're not purely up to you to determine their essence, because they also come from a history. They come from a culture, they come from a tradition in which the meaning of these objects that we're surrounded with are shaped, okay? There's a certain kind of a cultural, historical lineage which informs the essence of beings in the world, okay? Even inanimate beings. That's one thing. And that also includes us. When you come into the world for Heidegger, you're not this, like, Sartre kind of gives a kind of a simplistic characterization of this. Sartre is like, you're free, you're free, you're free. Heidegger it's more kind of realistic. Heidegger is going to say, you're not free in the sense that we all have a default mode of being. And the default mode of being is purely culturally informed, okay? This is how one walks, this is how one greets, this is how one greets each other in this culture. You bow or you shake hands. When you shake hands, it's already there, okay? This is how one eats in a culture. This is how many times one eats. This is what one eats. This is, how one courts the opposite sex. These are the sort of sexual practices that are permitted. This is how one dies. This is the funeral ritual. And Heidegger is going to say is, most of your life is you are just stuck, is a bit too much to say, okay? But you are just basically on this unconscious autopilot default mode of being, okay? We are all a product of the culture that we're from, okay? So that also applies to us. So then, as Heidegger's going to say, well, then how can there be a possibility for being you, authentically you? So that's something that we need to explore, okay? So there is, for Heidegger, still this question of human essence, which we're going to figure out for ourselves. But you have to understand human essence is something that is malleable. It's not malleable. There's an opening there. There's an opening to be an authentic you. But that opening is in the backdrop of a historical foundation, which most people are mostly operating most of the time. This is what he's going to, let me just kind of recap that part. What most people are, or what most people do, is just what most people do within that culture. Most people are just what most people do. And that's their justification, and that's their rationale. One does what one does, okay? So you use a hammer the way a hammer is used. You hammer nails in a distance that is kind of, customary and normative to the practice. But with all that said and done, there's still an opening there. There's something else that I wanted to say, and this is also very important. So I said the object, even though we ultimately determine what that object is and what we're going to do with it, there's a whole cultural momentum which basically is defining what this object is. And furthermore, this is the part that I missed out that I also want to point out on, is you can't understand, and this is very important, you can't understand the hammer in isolation. You can, if you theorize about the hammer, you are sort of abstracting and conceptualizing it away from the reality in which it operates. So what Heidegger is going to, and the same thing applies to you. If you want to theorize what a human being is, this is a human being, this is the form of a human being, this is the skeletal structure of a human being, this is the muscular structure of a human being. When you theorize and you abstract away from it, you lose something. You have this sort of intellectual understanding, but you don't have this kind of practical understanding. What I mean to say is, Heidegger's going to say, if you want to understand what a human being is, you have to understand how it operates. And to understand how it operates is to understand how it relates to its world. To really understand a human being is to not separate it out as a sort of object of medical or scientific scrutiny. To really understand what that thing is to understand its involvement and its interaction with the world which it regards as meaningful and relevant. So same thing with the hammer. You cannot truly, he says, you cannot truly possibly understand the human being nor the hammer outside of its, what's the word that he uses? I have it written down here somewhere. Where is it? The totality, okay? The referential totality in which it exists, what he calls the equipmental totality. So if you want to understand the hammer, you have to understand nails. But if you want to understand nails, you have to understand the hammer, okay? And if you want to understand nails and hammer, you have to understand wood, okay? But then, like, what's the essence of wood? You have to understand, like, chairs and desks, okay? And then you say, well, what's the essence of a chair? You know, it's like there's no reason for a chair to exist independently in and of itself. And then ultimately, it all comes back to us. So the chair and the desk are there because, you know, you're sitting down to eat a meal, or you're sitting down to, you know, write an essay. So the world is ultimately, the essence of the world is ultimately hinges on the question, well, what are we doing with it? Okay. So that's already saying quite a bit. So let's get into it, okay? So he uses this word Dasein. Dasein is this word that he's using to refer to what does it mean to be us, okay? And by us, he's not talking about the objective human body. What it means to be us is this type of mode of living and being part of this world. Human beings, what we call human beings, have a distinct mode of living and interacting and being a part of, being involved in this world. And he says one of the distinguishing features of this Dasein is the sort of phenomenological interaction of a human being with its environment. He invents all kinds of words, okay? Just keep that in mind. So we're not talking about the human being as the kind of body as a sort of object of study. We're talking about the way you feel you interacting with the world. He has that specific word Dasein. And he says, one of the main defining features of your phenomenological interaction with the world around you is that, he says, Dasein is able to question meaning. So he says, for no other being is being an issue, okay? So in other words, we can ask nothing else in the world. There's no other beings out there that have the property or the capacity to ask, what does it mean, okay? We are the only beings in the world who ask the question, what does it mean? Okay, so that's unique to his idea of what it means to be a human being. We are the ones that are confronted by the challenge of our own existence that doesn't arise for anything else. Okay, let's see here. Let's go. So the question of being is, he says, you can't see the forest for the trees. That's kind of a metaphysical consideration here. We cannot, he says, you cannot truly understand existence because you're always in it, okay? You're never going to be able to have a total, final, objective account of existence which does not involve your experience of it, because it's not like, I have it in here in the background. I have it kind of as the almost transparent background, but you see this idea that, you know, this guy is in the dome. He's in the dome of the world, and this idea that you can maybe get out of the world and then you can turn back around as this sort of detached, independent observer. And that's the sort of myth in science, you know, but a good scientist admits that. That's why you have, you know, in psychology, in biology, if you're studying animals in the wilderness, you have to always take into account this observation bias, that my being here changes the outcome. It changes. My being here studying these people potentially impacts their behavior. So I'm not getting an unbiased, distinct. There's always some there's always some exchange. Okay, so even let's say you as a biologist in a savanna and you're looking at some animal, you want to try to get as far back as possible in a way, but you can never get out of it. You want to get as far back as possible so you can observe the animals without simultaneously altering their behavior through your presence. Okay, but Heidegger says, yeah, you can do that, let's say, if you're observing animals, but you can't do it philosophically. You can't get to the philosophical position of being not in existence anymore. You have to make sense of existence while being way deep and all entangled in it. Okay, so he says all of these words that we talk about, you know, like object, subject, says these things are a sort of a kind of an idealistic abstraction of what we're trying to do. But again, going back to Merleau-Ponty, is if you want to draw that line between what is that which is observed and what is the thing which is doing the observing, you're going to get into a bit of a philosophical mess. You can't see the forest for the trees because you're in it. Okay, you're part of it. Okay, now I got Aristotle here. Let me give you, this is basically where we're going. And you already got a sense of this with the whole kind of idea of objects and interaction with objects. Let me try to put it, okay, let me see. Let me give you this example. Let me give you these two examples and then a little comment. So suppose you go into a restaurant. What you are going into the restaurant is going to shape what stands out in that restaurant. That's pretty obvious, you know what I mean? It's like, you have that experience. It's like, whatever's on your mind, or whatever is of a concern to you, that's what stands out, you know what I mean? If you're shopping around for a car, then while you're out and about in the city and in the streets, you're going to be looking at cars, okay? If you're shopping for, let's say, a specific car, you're going to see that specific car. It's going to just stand out. It's almost like it's going to be highlighted, okay? If you're looking for a girlfriend or boyfriend, that you're not looking at the cars anymore, you're looking at, you know, potential boyfriends and girlfriends. You know, if you're, you know, a social justice warrior, you're you know, what stands out is all the social injustice. So you get the world is in some sense a function of you. So if you go into a restaurant as what you come into the restaurant as makes the restaurant appear to you as a function of what you're coming in as. So if you're coming in as a cook, your experience, your total experience of the restaurant is different because you're a cook. If you come in as a waiter, even if you go to another restaurant that you don't work at as a waiter, different things are going to stand out to you. Okay, so what Heidegger is going to say is you're really entering into different worlds. Even though you're entering into the same physical restaurant, when the cook enters that restaurant, he's entering a different world than the waiter that he's walking into simultaneously through those doors. It's a different world because who they are subjectively is going to highlight different things of what you would call the objective world. Okay, if you go in as a food critic, you're entering a different world. If you go in as you know, sanitary inspection agent, you're entering a different world. If you're entering as a client, you're entering a different world. Okay, so the world is a Rubik's cube. Okay, what you do on the side of yourself alters what you do on the side of the world, intrinsically and inescapably. So again, that idea of subject-object is something that you have to get past. It's very difficult to get past, okay? But that's basically there. Let me give you another example, okay? The forest. You know, I like going in the forest. If you go into the forest with, you know, a mountain bike, the forest is different in a very, okay, you can always say, well, no, it's not different, okay? But in a very important way, to me, while I'm on the mountain bike, it's a very different forest. It rearranges itself based on how I've come into it. If I go into the forest with a chainsaw, it's a very different forest. If I go into the forest with, you know, a mushroom textbook and my mycologist friend, everything is rearranged. Different things are going to stand out. If I go into the forest with a shotgun, it's different. If I go into the forest with a rifle, it's different from the shotgun. Okay, if I go to the forest on snowshoes, it's different than if I go on hiking boots. And so that's it. But and you can say, this is the point. This is the point. You say, yeah, but we can nonetheless talk about the forest as being a kind of an objective, common thing to all of these things. And what Heidegger is going to say is, No, like not really. He's not talking even metaphysically. He's talking about it pragmatically. He's like, let's just talk about how you're experiencing it. When I'm going into the forest with snowshoes, I'm not thinking about, well, what is the forest in abstract and universal objective terms. No, the only thing that matters to me is the forest that I'm interacting with as it's presenting itself insofar as I'm walking with snowshoes. Only in some sense the philosopher will say, well, what is the inalienable, unalterable essence of the forest, independent of all the contingent circumstances and users? And Heidegger's going to say, well, that's another idea. That's the philosopher going into the forest. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that his truth is more true than the other truths. So that's you have to also get like we're not talking about the truth. We're talking about your practical encounter with the world. Okay. So that's also an important point. Is like what does the abstraction count for? It's theoretical, and this is also a very important point. Is then you can ask, well, how much does the theoretical understanding, that is to say, the textbook understanding of what the forest is that we can all agree upon? He says that's one mode of understanding, but it's not even the meaningful mode of understanding. So like, let's say driving a car is a good example. You can have a theoretical understanding of what the car is and how it works, but he says the real understanding is when you get in the car and you drive it. Okay, lived experience is much. I don't want to say it's better. It is, for Heidegger, it is better, but is different. It's a different mode of understanding than the theoretical understanding. Driving the car is, in some sense, a much you understand more. Not that you understand more, you understand a different, when you're doing your theory for driving a car and when you're driving the car, driving the actual car is different than the theoretical understanding of the car. So theoretical understanding is not, let's say, the gold standard. That's what Heidegger is going to say. We need to switch it around. This idea that once you understand something theoretically, you've really understood it. Heidegger is going to say, no. There are some things that, let's say, if you watch that documentary that I suggested, Being in the World, that you had that response to, there's some things that when you're an expert, you're a skilled carpenter, or let's say you're a professional athlete, or you're a cook, there are some things that stand out to you. And that's also very important, is you start to pick up on the nuances of the specific situation. That's good, because that's where we're going. You're able to pick up on the subtleties that are not in the textbook. The textbook is going to give you the broad idea. It doesn't tell you, when you drive over this, when you see that speed bump, from experience, you know how to deal with that speed bump, okay? The textbook never told you how to deal with that specific speed bump, okay? Or that specific pothole. So that kind of lived experience, that's what Heidegger is kind of talking about. And furthermore is, let's say, if you ask an athlete, well, how did you do it? Or if you ask a carpenter, well, how do you do it? They would even have difficulty explaining it to you in words. The lived experience is in some sense ineffable. Sorry, you can't even really articulate it. And then again, even if an expert tries to write the textbook, they know, you have to say, look, this is only the starting point. You have to the hands-on. That's the Heidegger again. Hands-on. You're hands-on in this world, and that's where it happens. Okay, let's try to make sense of Aristotle here in relation to Aristotle. What you get with Aristotle is a big influence on Heidegger. Okay, Heidegger writes a kind of a metaphysical commentary on Aristotle's metaphysics, and very important. So I see a similarity. Okay, so this is what Aristotle says, and then I'm going to extrapolate it to the Heideggerian version of it. Aristotle says basically this. Let me give you the shortcut. Aristotle says happiness is not wealth, it's not reputation, it's not pleasure. For Aristotle says happiness is doing a meaningful job to the best of your ability. Happiness comes from meaningful work done well. Okay, so that very important. Happiness is not a static thing. Happiness is a dynamic thing. It's an activity. Okay, so Heidegger is going to say things. What we are as a human being is not an object, but a doing. Human beings are more of a doing thing than a thing. Okay, that starts to make sense. You're always involved in a task. You're always active. You're always in an activity, and that's where real engagement, that's where real meaning, that's where real joy comes from. So Aristotle says, for instance, the shoe cobbler, the guy who makes shoes, is the happiest when he makes the best shoes that he can, and this is very important, with the materials that he's giving. So with the materials that he's given. So he says, the military strategist is always happy when he makes the best military strategy with the given situation. So now Heidegger is going to take what Aristotle says and now translate it to phenomenology. So what it sounds like with Heidegger is to live well and to have that joy is to always be responsive, not to the general idea, but to the specific situation. When you are in tuned to the specific situation, things stand out to you, details, nuances, okay? So, and that's like, I'm gonna use that when we talk about technology. If you understand, let's say, a machine which carves out, chairs, a machine which carves out chairs doesn't care. It doesn't care. It just proceeds mechanically, and it proceeds efficiently in a way, but it's not responding to the specific piece of wood. This specific piece of wood and that specific, there is no specific piece of wood. For the machine, there's just wood, okay? It's gonna suck it in and bang out a piece of, carved wood. There's no attention to detail. So Heidegger is gonna say, you're awake. You are awake when you are mindful of the specific situation. And the specific situation is, what is the world giving you right now? Okay. And in being mindful of the specific situation, you're able to pick out the subtleties that do not stand out for other people. You're able to see the details that are purely invisible for other people. Okay. So let's say a good carpenter can pick out a grain or a knot in the wood that somebody, I'm speaking about that kind of in abstract terms, because I myself am not a skilled carpenter. We can kind of see that, you know what I mean? Picking up subtleties, and in those subtleties, you're able to kind of make something out of it. So there's something else that I think that I want to add there. You're making the best you have of what you're given. And that's also a very important point that I kind of mentioned is, it's not general, it's not theoretical, it's practical, it's specific, okay? You're attuned, you're receptive, you're responsive, okay? You're mindful. And this is also very important, is you're not, like the carpenter, you're not shaving away the wood just to be in the moment. You're attuned to the moment, but you're always attuned to the moment for the sake of some project that you have down the line. You're bringing out a possibility from the wood, okay? You're not just, okay, I'm in that kind of like a Buddhist meditation. I'm in the moment. I'm aware. I'm attuned. I'm sensitive. I'm conscious and mindful of the world around me, of the details. It's not only that, okay? It's that, but moving towards actively an outcome, okay? We're always involved in projects, activities leading to outcomes. That's what it's all about, okay? So the what's it for? The what's it for is always there, and the what's it for is we have to decide what's it for. What's this piece of wood for? What's this education for? What's this life for? And okay, very very important is you can also become a machine in a way. You can become mechanical. You can if you stop caring, you can just not care. Okay, that's a simple way to put it. You can just simply not care. Say, I'm going to do this assignment, but I'm not going to care. Okay, I'm gonna carve this piece of wood, but I don't care because let's say, quotas, or you become very mechanical. So you just say, I carve this piece of wood, or I do this assignment as one does this assignment. Okay, let me just follow the basic protocol, and the basic protocol is basically sufficient to move right along with this life in an unconscious, meaningless way. Okay, he says that's always a possibility. You just do what one does. You carve this piece of wood as one would do it. You hammer this nail, you hammer this piece of wood into here as one would do it. And there's no attention. There's no subtleties and nuances. And so you're not putting your stamp on it. Okay. When you're mindful, you're alive and you're aware. Okay. And so you say, okay, if I hammer it just a little bit here, it's going to be different. You know what I mean? So you take charge, you own it. You own the situation, you own your life. It says, otherwise, you are in the default mode of being, which is what he calls basically average everydayness. Average, default, sort of averaged out everydayness, which is basically you're average. Okay, you don't want to be too far this way, because then you're going to stand out, and you don't want to be too far this way, because then you're going to stand out, and you're going to get criticism this way, you're going to get criticism this way. So everybody kind of gets cozy in the middle, and you're just an average person, but that sort of implies you're kind of an average kind of an unconscious way. Okay, I moved ahead here, but I think we're on point. So this being in the world, okay, you're always, again, you're always in the world. You're not some kind of abstract agent outside the world. You're involved in it. Okay, so that's kind of the wording of it. You talk about a human being, kind of as a thing in the world, or you could talk about a human being. They're being a human. Okay, yeah, and that's kind of like that's the lived part. Okay, and that's so you see, it's not theoretical. It's practical. It's so you are not a thing in the world. You are in the world. Okay, we do things, and we do things because they have a meaning for us. So let me try to put it this again, with this kind of theoretical versus the specific, theoretical versus specific. We say, well, the theoretical is the correct mode, and the specifics are just as specific. They're contingent. They're whatever. He's kind of flipping that around. Okay, he says, no, all you ever have is the specifics. Okay, all you ever have is a specific situation, specific moments, and then you can extrapolate from that kind of rules of thumb and guidelines and norms and so on. But if you're really living as you're attuned and you're dealing at the level of specifics, the theoretical is an abstraction from the specifics. Okay, it's not the true reality, of which the specifics are just the kind of a contingent shadow. Okay, so like another example is from the documentary, the cook. She says that she says you can pick up the cookbook. And if you try to follow the cookbook mechanically, you might not end up with a good recipe, and it's not going to be fun. It's procedural. You're saying this is the rule. I have to follow. It's very much like the rational man. Okay, this is the recipe. I can't deviate from it. Okay, but the point. This is the point. Is the recipe and the ingredients do not necessarily line up. You know what I mean? So how you're supposed to do something and what you realize in the material do not necessarily. So you say, look, you're kind of able to play between the two. It's like, okay, I understand the recipe, but today I'm given, instead of carrots, I'm given turnips. So how am I going to deal with the specific situation? Okay, and every situation is unique. You're living in the uniqueness of any given moment. You're mindful and you're responding to the specific. It's like an athlete. Again, the kind of in the documentary, the athlete is, okay, this is a good example. I have a good example. I can't give you a rule book for playing like Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo. And what you get is, when you see them, is they're able to. They're not following a rule. they're able to operate within the rules of the game, within the context, but they're able to respond well to the specifics that they find themselves in. No play is exactly the same play. Okay, so it's not like, okay, let's do this play, you know, like a football. Okay, let's do the Hail Mary pass, and it always works the same way. It's never quite the same way, and that's also interesting with Heidegger. The world is never. It's like same but different. Okay, it's always super specific. Okay, so let me give you an example. When I was when I first started out teaching, I was working at a much smaller college up north, and at lunchtime we'd kind of play we'd play different sports with the staff. And I remember the physics teacher was a bloody mess. Okay, he was like, he would trip on the ball, he couldn't dribble the ball, he couldn't catch a pass, it would like hit him in the face, like his glasses would fall on the floor. And it's like, so that's kind of this idea that this guy had all the sort of theoretical understanding. Nobody understands mechanics and projectiles, and mass is more. He has kind of a theoretical understanding, but that theoretical understanding did not translate to practical know-how one bit. Okay, so it's like that idea. Okay, let's see what we got here. So this idea, okay, as I said, the present at hand is you take things and you theorize about them. So this is the hammer. Okay, how does the hammer work? So, well, the hammer works because its center of gravity is displaced here, and it's heavier, and it's made out of iron, and so on. But so you can give a kind of a theoretical account of what a hammer is in terms of how it works. But to really understand what a hammer is to pick up the hammer, is to feel the hammer, is to use the hammer. Okay, so he makes a distinction that the present at hand is when you theorize something. He says that's not normally where the truth is or where we normally operate. We don't operate in the world by theorizing things and forming specific ideas about them. We operate in this world as a sort of dance, this kind of harmonious dance between us and things. Okay, so he says things are ready to hand. You use them. So things. Okay, let me see what I have to say about this. So he says the only time things become really a distinct object, separate from the totality of the environment which informs that object, is when the object falls apart. Okay, so say you're hammering with a hammer and the head of the hammer comes flying off. So you say, oh, well, why did this happen? Now all of a sudden the hammer as a specific thing, now it becomes real to you as a specific thing. Prior to that, the hammer didn't have its own autonomous existence. The hammer's existence was a continuation of you. So this idea of transparency, okay? When a carpenter is using a hammer, or a good carpenter is, let's say, using a lumberjack is using a chainsaw, it's an extension of himself. It's like when the pianist is playing the piano, it's an extension of himself. He doesn't even view when you're operating. You don't view the things in the world as things. You only view the things in the world when you go into this kind of theoretical mode, or when the thing breaks apart. When the chainsaw breaks apart, you have to ask yourself, well, why is it not working? Is it out of gas? Did I not, is there a problem with the air intake? So it's like doors, okay? Normally, the world is kind of completely invisible to you, Like you go through a door, you open the door and you go past it. You didn't have to make that into an object of consideration. You just kind of went. Okay, let me see what time I got here. Okay. You just kind of go through, you turn the door handle and you go through it. You're not aware of your hand. You're not aware of the door handle. It's kind of all transparent to you, in the same way that the only time that the door handle becomes a distinct object, and you have to kind of look at it intellectually, theoretically, is you turn the door handle and it kind of breaks off. And now you're holding the door handle and the door is not open. Okay. So now you have to ask yourself, why? Okay. The why there is different. The why is the mechanical explanation as to what went wrong here. Otherwise, the door handle, the why of the door handle is just so I can turn it and go through it, kind of unconsciously. Okay. Let me try to go a little bit further here. The example I like to use is, let's say, if you think about, let's say, an F1 driver in a car, I think I gave this example last class as well. The driver, let's say Lewis Hamilton in the car. Let me make two different distinctions there. When you first start driving the car is, you really feel the car as being different from you. It's an object that you are in, okay? And you have to kind of make sense of this object, okay? And you acquire an understanding of the object, and it's clumsy, it's awkward. You know, I remember once I was driving a standard car. I was at the US Customs, okay? And the guy's like, come, you know, it was my turn to cross the border. And I was driving alone. I'm driving this, you know, standard car that I wasn't good at. I was like, stall, stall, stall. And the guy looked at me and he's like, pull over. Okay, this doesn't make sense, you know? And then they interrogated me for like 45 minutes. And I said, look, I'm learning how to drive. Okay, so it's kind of weird, you know? But then you learn how to drive, and this kind of previous you that was kind of clumsy, it was like, it's hard to believe that, you know, now when you learn how to drive, the car is not in some sense an object in a way. It's, the car is sort of invisible to you. It's transparent. It's completely unconscious. It's second nature, okay? Now it's all about, where am I going? The why of the car is not, you know, how it works. It's the where is it going? That's the real why of the car. Until it starts to fall apart. And then all of a sudden it becomes an object again. It becomes an object of scrutiny. Otherwise, if you become a real good driver like Lewis Hamilton, the car is almost an extension of you. Like the way that the hammer is literally an extension of the carpenter. He feels the hammer, okay? And you can kind of say, you like a good hockey player, you feel the stick. It's almost like the stick, and you want that specific stick because you're calibrated with it, okay? It's almost like, you know, Lewis Hamilton in his brain, if you want to talk about it in those objective terms, it's almost like there must be something in his brain that has coded out the car, okay? That it knows, it's sort of like, it plugs into the car the way that, you know, like, I don't know, like an Avatar, you know, they plug into those like flying dragons. He's plugged into the car. So he feels himself, not as a separate self, but as a continuity with the car, which is in a continuity with the track, okay? That he's able to, in his brain, if you want to talk about it in terms of brains and bodies, his brain is like calibrated to feel like the shift in G-forces and so on. It's an extension of, and then when you give him a new car, a lot of that transfers over, that know-how, but he still has to kind of get accustomed to it, okay? And then the car becomes invisible. So that's what Heidegger is saying, going back, kind of abstracting away. We're always in that, your life, you operating in your body. You don't know how, I don't know how I'm speaking right now, you know, but I am, you know. I don't know how to blink my eyes and move my hands, but I am. It's so transparent to you that it's just a continuation of this sense of me, okay? So in the way that my body is a continuation of this sense of me, Lewis Hamilton driving a car, when he's really on it, okay, it's his sense of himself. It's that continuous experience wherein, you know, you can talk about subject and object, but when you're in that experience, subject and object is a meaning. It doesn't even, it's not even a meaningless distinction. It doesn't even come to your mind at all. You know, it's just a continuous flowing. Okay. So in that way, he says, it's like this being that you are is transparent to you. You don't see your own being because it's transparent to you in the way that water doesn't see, you know, fish must seem transparent. Water must appear to be transparent to a fish. It's invisible. And yet you know that it's there and you have a difficult time articulating it. Yet it's the most fundamental thing to you. Okay, so it's kind of consciousness, you know. And now this is kind of the second step, is once you're in that mode, then you have a kind of a decision, and I think it's meaningful to talk about it as a decision. You can continue driving a car as one drives the car, and you stop at every stop sign and you stop at every red light, or you that's not a bad example. That's kind of like, I'm encouraging you to break. Never mind. Or you can, once you're fully attuned and you have that level, it's sort of a mastery. Then you can start to be really authentic. You can start to, and in some sense, you always have that mastery because you are always the master of you, okay? Nobody can give you a theoretical understanding of who you are, the specific you, than yourself, okay? You are the master of yourself more than anybody else. So there's always that choice of, well, now what do I do? And you can always, he says there's a choice. You can go to the default mode of being, which is, I just do what the average person does. Or you can start responding to the specific situations of your life. And he said, when you start responding to the specific situations of your life, like a carpenter picking out specific nuances in the wood, you can start to draw out different possibilities. Okay. And when you start to open up those possibilities, like a cook, okay, given these ingredients, she can make something that nobody has made. You're introducing new possibilities into the world. Okay. And you always have that possibility. He says that's being authentic. Okay. Moving right along here. Let me skip some of this. I've covered some of this here. Okay. I encourage you to read this. This sense of a self-interpreting self. Okay. Let me just read it. Okay. This is kind of as deeply philosophical and abstract as we're going to get in this lecture and in this course. Okay. What your sense of yourself is invisible to yourself. Okay. Because you are always, what Heidegger would be is, you're always caught up in the world. Okay. The world in which you also interpret and create, which is in some sense a flip side of yourself. Okay. Everyday environmental experiencing, okay, this classroom, this lecture, me preparing the lecture while I'm preparing it, does not present the presenter, it does not present the experiencer to itself. What one is primordially does not present itself. Okay, it's like you can't look into a metaphysical mirror. All you get back is basically the content of your experience. So then what is basically what fundamentally you are is just your experience, and which direction you choose to take with that experience, and what possibilities you choose to entertain with that experience, if you choose to entertain any possibilities at all. Because otherwise you could just say, I want the sort of default experience. Okay. So let me skip over that. Okay, maybe that makes sense. Okay. So average everydayness. Again, most of what you are, if you were to give an account of your experience of the world, is just average everydayness, is the normal mode of the existence of Dasein. Okay, you don't assert yourself, and you assert yourself by picking up again on the subtleties that open up new possibilities by being mindful and aware. Normally, you just do what one does. Okay. Let me skip over this. Okay, so now this idea of authenticity. I'm going fast here. I'm speeding up a little bit. So he defines it as ownedness. Okay, you own yourself. You own your specific situation. Okay, being one's own, and he contrasts that with what he calls the crowd. Okay, the herd. You can always get lost in the herd. So you can ask this question. Okay. What does it to be oneself? Okay, at one with oneself, or truly representing oneself. Okay, on one hand, you can say, well, I'm always me. Okay, being oneself is inescapable, since whatever one does is basically what you're doing, is your choices, is your actions. So you can always say, well, how is it not me? Okay, but now if you're honest with yourself, you can say there's a lot of things which I say, this is me, this is what I like, this is what I care about, this is the music that I listen to. And how much of that is you, and how much of that has been basically been given to you. Okay, on the other hand, we are sometimes inclined to say that some of our thoughts, decisions, and actions that we undertake are not really one's own. Okay, they're not really a genuine expression of oneself. So this we call the average everydayness. Okay, this sort of mindless, inauthentic. It's a kind of a conformity. Okay, it kind of goes back to the sort of present age. But Heidegger is not talking about this with the same kind of negative connotation as Kierkegaard. Heidegger is just saying this is kind of a fact of life. A fact of life is if you analyze your behavior most of the time, you are just operating as one is expected to. In the perimeter of your given culture. Everybody just is a sort of expression of that culture which they're born into and which has primarily shaped them. So what does he say? He says anybody that is in what he calls the crowd, okay, doing what one does, he says they are not a definite other. They are not a definite person. They are not a definite other, and any other can represent them. They are you can swap them in and out interchangeably. Average individual, okay. And again, we all have that possibility. We are all that most of the time. So he says in that there's no possibility for authenticity. It's inauthentic. It's mindless. It's kind of like zombie mode. Okay, zombie mode autopilot. Or he says you can become alert. You can become awake, and you always are awake in the specific moment. You always find yourself in that specific moment, and then you have the possibility. Now, what do I do in relation to the specific moment? With relation to the specific wood that I find myself in, or in relation to the specific play in this specific game that I find myself in, okay? In this specific social situation that I find myself in, okay? You can always default back, and greet each other and say hi to each other in a very polite, cordial manner as is expected, So I like that, like when I'm walking around the hallways of the college and, you cross a student, it's always interesting, like, how is this interaction going to be played out, And it's like, like I look at the students, sometimes, they look at me and they look away. Sometimes they don't look at me at all. And these are they're all kind of socially ingrained normative practices. Okay. And then, you're looking, or you say, hi, how are you, sir? Yeah, I'm doing good. How are you yourself? Okay. I'll see you later. You have a conversation with somebody. You can say, oh yeah, how's the weather? How's everything? There's nothing genuine there. There's nothing authentic there. Because you're not responsive. You're not responding to the specific person. The specific person is not responding to you at that moment. Okay. So inauthentic. Next says there's three things. Moving right along here. Let's start wrapping this up. It says basically there's three things that can sort of wake you up and make you come back to that moment. Make you mindful, and therefore in being mindful you have the possibility of acting authentically, drawing out possibilities that are there within the ingredients, within the situation that nobody else really sees or nobody else acts upon. Okay, so let's go through these. So the first one is anxiety. Okay, so that's a kind of Herbert Dreyfus, who's a commentator on Heidegger, says anxiety is a good thing. Anxiety is a sort of this self-reflection, and it's a self-reflection of realizing that you're lacking something. So anxiety should not be something to be avoided. Anxiety should be sort of welcomed, because now you're aware of the kind of problem, and you can kind of you can go a little bit further into it, and going further into it, you can say, okay, now I see the problem, and I can see how I can act on this anxiety provoking thing. Okay. But as opposed to kind of looking away from it and trying to kind of, you have some drinks so you don't have to feel the anxiety. So no, the anxiety is a good thing. The anxiety can make you look at yourself. Okay. Second one is death. Okay. He says you're always running towards death. So he says, it's good. Take a walk through the graveyard. One's awareness of one's own death makes you can draw you into, okay, I'm alive. And I'm alive means this is it. Okay, like I'm having an experience right now. All right. And this is kind of the third one. He calls it guilt. Okay, I kind of relate it with the kind of anxiety. This guilt is that you have a potential, and you realize that you're kind of falling short of that potential. If you're falling short of your engagements of what you want to be doing, what are the tasks at hand? What are the things that you want to be doing? Okay, and how can you move towards that to bring out those possibilities? All right, let's go a little bit further here. I'm almost done. If you have any questions or comments, just jump right in. So this idea also, he talks about language. Language is also very important. He says, our understanding of ourselves is structured by language. Our understanding of ourselves and our understanding of the world are informed by language. Language is in some sense dictates, what is and what possibilities are open. So in the documentary, they also do a kind of good job of that. So, they say like, in ancient Greece, you had the sort of language that basically everything grew. It was a sort of growing. It was a sort of becoming, reaching its optimal potential, and this kind of withering away. And everything was understood with regard to that basic framework. Okay. Then, he talks about the mode of being that was felt in Rome. Okay, this mode of power and dominance and mastery and imposing form on things. So you're making, okay, you're sculpting, you're shaping, the kind of the potter, the sculptor, you impose form on them, and that language implies a certain possibility of who you are and what the world can be. Then he talks about the kind of the Christian era and so on. He says now we're in the kind of the technological era, and that language also kind of shapes our sense of ourselves and our sense of what can be and what is permitted, what is allowed, and what should be valued, and so on. Okay, so he talks about technology. He talks about technology in kind of two ways. One way is this idea of, again, that I mentioned, this idea of care. When you, what you are is something that is involved in tasks. You're always fulfilling a task, and you can care. You can be attuned to the specifics, like a carpenter is attuned to, you know, what character does this specific piece of wood have, and how can I use it? How can I work around it, or how can I use it to my advantage? Oh man, my voice is starting to go. So even, well, the musician in the documentary says, okay, look, the guitar which is made by somebody versus a guitar which is made by a machine are very different. Oh my God, my voice is going. This is why I normally have a glass of water. So the guitar that is made by the human is, he says the human being is sensitive to it. He understands why the guitar has to be made. The machine can never understand why the guitar is being made, okay? It's just following an algorithm. It's just cut here, cut there, move it along, you know? The real artisan, the carpenter, understands the why of it, okay? So is able to kind of pick out the details which are going to be in line with that, okay? So you can criticize this, you know, is it, well, you know, all this kind of, it's kind of almost a romanticization of the past and these kind of, you know, artisanal traits and so on. You know, you might say, no, we're better off now, you know, let machines do everything. And I see both sides here. He is much more of a kind of a rural, you know, admiring the kind of the old ways, you know, because again, what we are is so much what we do. What we are is so intrinsically related with what we do. It gives us meaning. It gives us things to be done. It gives us tasks. Okay, so there's value in that. And this idea, like kind of one upcoming existential crisis that we may have is, they say that in 20 years, 50% of the workforce is basically going to be laid off as a result of, you know, robots and AI and automation. And one way of looking at it is, oh, you know, well, there's an economic issue there that I want to get into, is basically like, how are the people that are laid off going to make any money to buy the things that are made by machines? That's a kind of a whole question of equity and social economic distribution. That's a kind of ethical thing, okay? But one attitude that you might take is, well, that's great. You know, we're freed of all this kind of drudgery and mundane labor and all this stuff. What Heidegger's going to say is, like, we're free of all that labor because we've made it into, with capitalism, this kind of, you know, assembly line mentality, this division of labor. But, you know, the artisanal farmer or whatever, his work may be hard, but it gives him meaning. So now, you know, Heidegger's almost kind of predicting a major existential crisis, which is, what are you going to do if so much of what gives us meaning is our work? What's going to happen to humanity when 50% of the workforce gets laid off by machines? We're going to have, you know, it's like, no, you know, just kind of read poetry and write poetry and, you know, do arts and crafts and play card games all day while you collect, you know, universal basic income. That might be good, you know, universal basic income. But he's going to say, even with universal basic income, what are you going to do? You know, if so much of our meaning is related to our activity, and once that's gone, then what can we expect? Okay, let me see here. Just something came up here. Okay, and then lastly is basically this. I think I have here one more slide. So this idea that with technology, they're also able to shape possibilities. You know, like if you look at, let's say, Cambridge Analytica and so on, you can give somebody a narrative. You can make you know, people that are for the president, you can give them, you know, all sort of confirmation bias, things that already align with their worldview, with their perspective. People that are for the president, give them more material that's in line with the president. And people that are opposed to the president, they're only going to get footage and suggested videos and so on that are already in line with their preconceptions. And furthermore, it sort of limits possibilities. So how you understand, it's like what you are always kind of interfacing with the world. Now, if somebody can provide another form of interface, that limits your possibilities. So it's like, okay, well, I'm hungry, so I'm going to order food, and that interface is going to tell you, what you're going to eat, or what you can eat, or what possibilities are open to you. And so you're kind of limited by technology in a way. Okay. Let me try to put it this way. Okay, is your phone, when you're using it and you're using it well. Even let's say this computer and this kind of Zoom lecture, when you're using it and you're using it well, it's invisible. The technology is invisible to me. When I'm on my phone and I'm texting or whatever, I'm not aware of the phone as an object. The phone is in some sense a transparent means or a medium by which I'm doing the real thing, which is, let's say, the communication. The phone only becomes an object for me when I drop it, or it cracks, or it starts to glitch, or the battery goes out. Then all of a sudden, let's say, what I'm doing with my phone is sort of beyond my phone. Okay, I'm looking through my phone as though my phone were sort of a window. It's a kind of a transparent window. Only when the phone breaks or something goes wrong with the screen, that now my attention is gone from out through my phone to my phone now as an object. So that interface, as we said last class, is important, because how you interface with the world dictates not only what possibilities are open in the world, but also who you are. Okay, so we said, reading a book. Last class we said, if you read a book on a Kindle versus reading a book on printed paper, it stands out differently. So the people that are in charge of the interface get to basically dictate what possibilities and how the world is to be perceived and engaged with. Okay, so this is kind of a quote that I took from a speaker at a modern tech conference. Okay, so he says, contemporary life is mediated through digital interfaces, websites, and apps. Okay, it is through interfaces that digitally mediated and organized life is constituted. So you see the importance of it. So how the interface is laid out basically tells you what exists and what does not exist. It defines what exists and what does not exist. The interface is actively designed to modulate. Look at this. The interface is actively designed to modulate user action with the aim, hope, and promise of producing desirable outcomes. Hold on. For those who own and operate such interfaces. So there's the danger of technology as well. Is you're operating not only for your own sake, you are operating for the sake of something else, which has given you the interface. Okay, so what Heidegger says is, if you go down the road of technology, you may get to the point where you lose the possibility, even in the language, of speaking of an individual. Okay, where we may get to the point where there isn't even the possibility in language of speaking of the unique individual. We are all just going to be basically, predictable entities through, predictive analytics and data mining and targeted advertisement. And that's it. Okay. And that's going to be the new mode of being. The new mode of being is going to be, here you are, here's the content that's going to be fed to you. We already know how you're going to respond to it. And, you're going to buy, sell, eat. And that's all that there's going to be. So you have to choose, whether or not to, where there's a place for the individual there, or whether we want to keep this idea of an individual in our language. Okay, that's it, guys. So basically this idea of, you either take the red pill or the blue pill. You either be just like everybody else is, or you wake up and you wake up to this present situation and you see what possibilities can I derive from this moment that I find myself in. Okay, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for sticking around.